Before there was a bridge, there was only the water. Where Lake Michigan and Lake Huron meet at the Straits of Mackinac, 5 miles of open channel separated Michigan from itself. For generations, travelers waited hours, sometimes days, for a ferry to carry them across. The northern peninsula might as well have been a foreign country. People had dreamed of a crossing for nearly a century. Engineers called it impossible. The straits were too wide, the currents too fierce, the winters too cruel, ice thick enough to crush a hull, winds that came screaming down from Canada without warning. To span it, men would have to conquer water that had never been conquered. The dream found its champion in David Steinman, an engineer who had spent a lifetime building bridges. He had studied the straits, run the numbers, argued with skeptics. Where others saw an impassable barrier, he saw a line waiting to be drawn. In 1954, the drawing began to rise from the water. First came the foundations, the hardest part of all. Workers sank 34 massive concrete piers into the bed of the straits, some plunging more than 200 feet below the surface. Divers descended into freezing, black water where they could barely see their own hands. Above them, the world was sunlit and ordinary. Below, it was another planet entirely. The men who came were a rough and hardy crew. Ironworkers from across the country, many of them following the steel from job to job like a traveling tribe. They lived in camps and boarding houses on both shores, far from families, chasing a paycheck and a purpose. They called themselves bridgemen, and they walked steel the way other men walked sidewalks. As the towers rose, so did the danger. The main towers climbed higher than a 50-story building, their tops swaying gently in the wind. Men worked out on narrow beams with nothing beneath them but air and the cold gleam of the water. There were no safety nets in those early days on the towers, only balance, nerve, and the trust of the man working beside you. 5 workers died before the bridge was finished. A diver who never came back up, a man who fell from the catwalk into the straits, another lost when a temporary structure gave way. Each death rippled through the camps in silence, a reminder that the water had not surrendered, it had only been held back for a while. But the work went on because it had to. Enormous cables were spun across the towers, each one made of thousands of individual steel wires bundled together, wire enough, laid end to end, to circle the earth. Spinning machines crept back and forth across the sky, laying the strands that would one day carry the weight of the whole roadway. Then came the deck. Section by section, the roadway was hung from the cables, reaching out from each tower toward the empty middle. For months, 2 ends of a bridge pointed at each other across a gap of open water, like hands not yet touching. Every man on the job watched that gap grow smaller. The engineers had learned hard lessons from other bridges. Years earlier, a suspension bridge in Washington had twisted itself apart in the wind, writhing like a ribbon before it collapsed. Steinman designed the Mackinac to breathe instead, its center span built to sway as much as 35 feet in a heavy storm, bending so it would never break. On November 1st, 1957, after 3.5 years, the bridge opened to traffic. The ferries fell silent. Cars streamed across the span for the first time, drivers gripping their wheels and staring at the water far below. What had taken hours now took minutes. A state divided by nature was, at last, made whole. They called it the Mighty Mac. At nearly 5 miles from shore to shore, it was among the longest suspension bridges in the world, a slender thread of steel strung across one of the most punishing stretches of water on the continent. It stood as proof of what stubborn men could do when they refused to accept the word impossible. The bridgemen packed up and moved on, the way they always did, chasing the next span in the next state. Most of their names were never written down, but their work remained, humming under tires, groaning softly in the wind, holding fast through winters that would have swallowed anything less. Today the Mighty Mac still stands, painted its familiar ivory and green, catching the light at the top of the state. Millions cross it every year without a second thought, never guessing at the divers in the dark, the men on the swaying towers, the 5 who never came home. The water is still there beneath them, patient, cold, and finally, quietly spanned.